Welcome to Fuller Speed Ahead. I am here at the Ohio Trucking Association with Dan Doran. We're talking about a lot of what's happened in the industry. This has been a conference dedicated a lot to the economics and the state of the freight market. 2019 has been a pretty interesting year. I'd like to get your perspective on what you guys have seen and where things are headed.
Well, we are primarily a flatbed company, kind of oversized, specialized transportation. So the first part of the year was probably typical across all modes, but pretty soft. First quarter, second quarter. Then July, we started seeing some things pick up and improvement. So I think it's a typical year, basically. You and I had this conversation earlier about trucking in general. This year is, you have to work for the freight. You know, you have to work and find it. It's not just dropping in our lap like it was last year.
Last year, you didn't have to know much about trucking, and in some ways that hurt the industry because everyone thought they could just be a trucking owner, and they bought a truck, and in many ways the industry is fighting that issue, trying to get rid of the capacity that has oversupplied.
Yeah. Well, and you know, last year is like every other year that's been good. You see a lot of, especially in the owner-operator market, you see a lot of guys that have gotten out of the business, gone to do something else. They go work for their brother-in-law on roof, or they're a carpenter or something like that, building houses or whatever. They see the money, they start talking to their buddies, and they see the money come back. And so they'll go out and buy another truck and say, hey, the rates are great. And so, yeah, that adds to the capacity. But those guys, you know, generally don't last long. I mean, they'll get back out of it again when things tighten up.
Yeah, that pendulum right now is in the favor of the shippers. Last year it was in favor of the carriers. It seemed to be moving back towards the carrier side, at least in the last couple of weeks. But we'll see what happens. What are you seeing right now? You've talked about August and September being stronger than the first half of the year. Do you think it's going to carry through the end of the year?
Well, I think again, it's going to be a typical year. I think we'll finish out. There'll be some seasonal slowdowns, Thanksgiving, Christmas, you know, the end of the year type of thing. I think it'll kind of soften up a little bit, but I expect it to be relatively strong up until Thanksgiving. I think we'll have a good year the rest of the year.
Now you're in specialized hauling, which I take it means a lot of irregular, inconsistent freight, a lot of project-based freight. Is it like windmills, and is it offshore?
No, never had an appetite for the wind business, but a lot of machine tools, a lot of probably half our freight comes through one of the southeast ports: Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk, Newport News, Long Beach. We're starting to do a little bit of that.
So off a break bulk ship, and is it huge? Is it oversized equipment, the kind that you need the scout driver, the pilot cars and stuff?
Yes. Yeah. So not everything is that big, but anything from a small crate up to, you know, something 12, 13 foot tall, 13 feet wide. So some pretty big stuff. What's
the coolest thing you've ever hauled?
Well, that's a good question. Back when I was driving, I got into a little bit of some unusual stuff, but I hauled a monument out of. We had a bronze artist in Cincinnati that had a contract with the federal government to redo monuments. So we would pick up some monuments in the national parks and bring them into Cincinnati. So it was I think it was a South Carolina or North Carolina monument that we picked up in Gettysburg that was looked like the Iwo Jima. The guys putting the flag into the ground. So that was pretty cool
Yeah.
See that going down the road.
And then it would come back and refurbish it, and you guys would haul it back.
Right.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's always interesting. We actually started something called FAK, Freight All Kinds, which is hauling all of the irregular freight. So I think some of it's been everything from artwork. I think one is cadavers. And so like it, but then you get in these, one was windmills and offshore windmills, and so it's interesting when you think about the diversity of freight that's moved around. Most people when they talk about trucking, they think of what goes into the grocery store, what goes at the Walmart, but really trucking is far bigger than that and far more important than that. Our industry is under a lot of, whether it's regulatory pressures or financial and economic pressures. I'm wondering if you had one thing, a magic wand that you could change overnight, what would it be?
Well, I think probably hours of service. Recently, I'm the immediate past chairman of Truckload Carriers Association. It was my focus during my chairman year to get out in front of the hours of service. I thought personally that the industry should have been out in front of hours of service before electronic logging devices. I think it would have been a lot easier for the driver population to accept electronic logging devices if we would have corrected the sleeper times, being able to split sleeper time and the 30-minute break and all that kind of stuff. If we could have corrected all that before the mandate of ELDs, I think it would have been a lot easier. ELDs would have been a lot easier to sell.
Yeah, for sure.
So my year as chairman, that was part of the focus. It was we were fortunate to have an administrator at the FMCSA, Ray Martinez, who was willing to listen to the industry and concerns. So we got out in front of that. The Truckload Carriers Association helped really move the needle on that issue. It's not over yet. It's still up in the air, but at least the proposed changes are some of the things that we voiced our concerns about, the 30-minute break and being able to split sleeper time. I don't think personally that they've gone far enough with the 7 and 3. I think it should be, you used to be able to split it up 5 and 5, before they changed the hours of service regulations, but so, yeah.
You think we'll ever get to the point where the government says X number of hours and you guys figure it, the driver can figure it out, or is it kind of counter to politicians to give too much freedom away?
Well, you have to put yourself in the politician's seat. They have a lot of people chirping in their ear, and my point is the safety people are going to push back on some of the changes because it can be perceived as extending the day, the driver's day. So, and some people think that, if you can take a 3-hour break now, instead of working 14 hours, you're working 17. Well, that's not really the case. It's, you're giving the driver the ability to avoid congestion, avoid weather. My good example, or my go-to example is a driver goes into Atlanta, it's 4 o'clock and he's on the north side of Atlanta. Do you want that guy spending his next 2 hours in bumper-to-bumper traffic going through Atlanta? Or do you want him to stop on the north side of Atlanta, take a 3-hour break, get a shower, get something to eat, maybe lay down, take a little bit of a nap, get back up 7 o'clock. It may take him an hour instead of 2 hours to go through, which, what's the safe answer there? The safe answer is let the driver make that decision. Sure. If he wants to avoid the traffic, let him.
Yeah, I had someone describe it to me once. I fly a lot, and I'm sure you do as well. And the challenge is when I go to the airport and the flight's delayed 3 or 4 hours, that in itself is exhausting, sitting at the airport thinking you're taking off. And I think about the fact, by the time I get to Chattanooga, I'm completely exhausted. Even if I've only been in the air for 4 or 5 hours, or been between the airport to home 4 or 5 hours. It's that mental and physical exhaustion of getting ready to leave, not leaving, getting ready to leave, that just takes a toll on you. And I think about the fact that if I had to then take an 80,000-pound vehicle and drive it, I don't know that even just 4 or 5 hours, that I would have the capacity to do it. And it's that inconsistency that actually becomes really, really taxing for drivers. And it's the scheduling and the inconsistency around the scheduling that really becomes a big issue.
Yeah, that's a good example, because you put yourself in the driver's seat of a truck and you're at a shipper's location and you expect to, well, it'll take me an hour to load here, I'll be on the road and I should be home or at my next stop at a certain hour, and they delay. You know you've got that big trip still ahead of you, and you want to get going, but you can't really lay down and wait because they may want you backing into a dock or something.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I think oftentimes the shippers have a lot more control in the driver's time than, frankly, the driver has. And at times, shippers forget the fact there's a human in that truck. And I think sometimes truck companies do. I mean, it happens. I don't think there's nobody in the industry that's 100% innocent of these issues around hours of service or driver fatigue 100% of the time. It happens at the carrier level. Drivers themselves have some influence on how those hours are managed. Their decorum at the docks can impact how they're treated in terms of what priority. You know, a guy that goes in, raises hell at the dock may not be the first one that gets loaded. But also, you know, shippers, really our whole ecosystem impacts the quality of life of the drivers, and I think oftentimes it's forgotten and less appreciated. You were a past chairman, or past chairman of the Truckle Cares Association, which isn't as well known as perhaps the ATA is, but plays a really important advocacy role and education role in the truckload sector. I'm curious, as you think about the work that you have done and that TCA is doing, what are you guys most proud of?
At TCA, we've made a lot of changes, and it didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't in my chairman year. It's been something that's been coming for 4 or 5 years. I'll go back to Keith Tuttle when he was chairman 4 or 5 years ago. We really made a concerted effort to make the association more of a value to its members. And by that I mean listening to what they want. They want a source for education. They want somebody to represent the voice of truckload, which the ATA is not necessarily that voice. So we began an advocacy push. And so I think being part of that transformation is something I'm proud to have been a part of. So I think the TPP program, Engage, and the best practices groups are all something that the association members value and see a reason to join and a reason to stay members of the association. So all those things combined that was a concerted effort started several years ago to build on those programs. It all kind of came together when John Leibolt came on board. He's a great leader, had a good background at the National Automobile Dealers Association. So he had established programs that we were trying to build. The best practices group's something they did. The academy is something that we're working on, still in development. It's something he did at NADA. So all those things transformed the association, at least in my view, into something that is more of a business rather than a feel-good association. Mm-hmm. We were doing a lot of programs, and not that they're bad or not of value, but we have to, we made a concerted effort to look at the association as more of a business than just a fraternity or a group of guys, you know, so.
Yeah, it's oftentimes growing up in the TCA, I think my dad would go there because he was most excited to intermingle with his peers. Right. And I think the direction that I've heard you guys collectively at the administration or the executive board level, as well as the association itself, have talked about things like education, advocacy are really important. And you pointed out something earlier, the ATA's role and charter perhaps is different and more expansive because you have large parcel and LTL carriers, and they're focused on a lot on infrastructure and these sort of big congressional elements, whereas TCA, while there's part of that, the core focus is making the industry safer, more profitable, and hopefully stronger participants in the market.
Right, and not to keep bringing up hours of service, but the change in the hours of service and sleeper time, splitting sleeper time and that sort of thing, is not necessarily something that's real important to the ATA members. I mean, you think about it, the UPSs and the FedExes, and they don't have that issue because it's all a lot of daytime traffic. A lot of their guys are out and back the same, they're at home every night. So the truckload segment has a little different need when it comes to 2 hours of service. So that's why it's important for the TCA to have a voice when things like that come up.
Yeah, and the truckload as a part of the industry as a percent is much larger than even the part, even you add all of LTL parcel up, truckload's still a very important part and a disproportionate part of the industry. But because the due structure is set at the ATA, it creates this advocacy around these huge companies like FedEx and UPS that is different than perhaps you would get with truckload carriers. And I think it's important for the industry to sort of, you know, join organizations because trucking as an industry is very fragmented. Having a voice that they can rally around is pretty important.
Yeah, and you know, 8 times out of 10 or 9 times out of 10, we're on the same page with the ATA. But it's those 1 or 2 times that
it's like the doubles, the
size and weight.
Yeah.
You know, size and weight's a big issue. Going back to hours of service, it was something that we thought was important, but ATA was wanted to focus on ELDs and getting that ball across the goal line first, and so we went to the administration ourselves and brought that split sleeper time and so forth up. So.
Well, I think there was a lot in the industry, across the industry, that will applaud hours of service changes. It's one thing, you know, I always found it interesting is the ELD thing becomes very polarizing, but at the end of the day, all the ELD device is a measurement and adherence device, an accounting device of the hours themselves. The real argument's over the hours of service rules. And I think that oftentimes gets forgotten or lost, is that that's the story. Anything else that's sort of top of mind from your perspective?
You know, there's a lot of talk today about younger drivers, which is, a lot of people are for it. A lot of people maybe not so much. You made the comment about earlier about a guy and his decorum at the dock, and maybe gets pushed to the back of the line because he's a little bit of an issue or
They're just having a bad day.
Yeah, right. Aside from the safety part of it and their ability and experience behind the wheel, what I've seen is, and I started driving when I was 18, 19 years old myself, and maybe that's why I look back at some of the things I did, and maybe that's why I'm not so crazy about the idea, but their decorum shows up in roadside inspections as well. And that's one of the biggest issues that I've seen. We had a younger guy that had just turned 21, was just able to go interstate. Within 6 months, he had 3 roadside inspections, and they were lists. It wasn't, he just got pulled over and written up for a light, but it was light and a oil leak, and so something was there that created an issue for that officer to look further, and it was his attitude and how he dealt with the.
I mean, 18-year-old, I think about my own, I didn't drive a truck, but I think about at 18, you know, my prefrontal cortex was not fully vetted out, and at 18 years old, you have that reptilian sort of caveman mindset, and you know, it's in many ways sort of a defiance of authority that isn't fully vetted. So
yeah, so that's an issue that's out there floating around. I think you'll hear more about that. I think the insurance side of that equation, they say they will insure the younger drivers, but some of the insurance people I've talked to is like, I don't think.
You first, right? Yeah. It's no one wants to be the first to do that. Well, Dan, I really appreciate you coming on here today, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the TCA show, in addition to other conferences and events.
Do you know an innovative and disruptive tech company that is changing the freight industry? Or are you that company? Nominations are being accepted now through October 5th for the 2020 Freight Tech 100 Awards. Last year, FreightWaves received more than 500 nominations. The top 25 companies are recognized within the top 100. Winners are chosen by an amazing peer class of industry executives, investors, and academics. Being a member of the FreightWaves Freight Tech 100 and Freight Tech 25 is an amazing marketing and public relations opportunity. Last year's inaugural winners include companies like Tesla, Convoy, JB Hunt, Project 44, and Amazon. 2020 winners will be announced at FreightWaves Live Chicago, November 12th and 13th.